6 years, $52,000, and 2 knees that were just about shot. That was the price I'd paid for being my daughter-in-law's free nanny. When she announced number 4 was on the way, while admiring her fresh manicure, she never expected that this time I'd do the unthinkable. The ache in my lower back flared up again. It's like a low-grade fire that never really goes out. My constant companion for the last 6 years. 6 years since the first grandbaby Lily was born. Now she's 6, and there's Mason who's 4, and little Chloe, just 2. My life has become an endless loop of diapers, midnight cries, car rides from preschool to soccer practice, and rushing home to get dinner on the table. I'm Betty, 67 years old. I'm supposed to be enjoying those Alaska cruises I dreamed about, or joining a book club with my friends. Instead, I'm a full-time, unpaid nanny. My doctor keeps mentioning knee replacement surgery. This arthritis is only getting worse. But really, when would I even have the time for that, let alone the money? My retirement fund, the one I had so carefully rebuilt after losing nearly everything in the 2008 crash, was down by more than $52,000. And that money wasn't just for toys or clothes for the kids. It was for their utility bills, their weekly groceries, and even the expensive outfits my daughter-in-law, Tiffany, would accidentally forget to pay for. I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing a dried ketchup stain off the kitchen floor, when I heard the aggressive crunch of gravel from Tiffany's luxury SUV. She always drove like she was late for a red carpet. The door flew open and she walked in, tossing her brand new Michael Kors handbag, definitely new, onto the clean counter I had just wiped down. Her eyes were glued to her phone, thumbs scrolling nonstop. "The kids have eaten," I said, trying to keep my voice even, trying to hide the exhaustion that had settled deep in my bones. "I left the chicken casserole in the fridge for you and Michael." Tiffany just let out an that hollow little sound I knew so well. She opened the refrigerator, pulling out one of those expensive organic kale juices. "Oh, by the way," she said, her tone as casual as if she were commenting on the weather, "you'll need to get the guest room cleared out. Baby number 4 is on the way." The kitchen went completely silent. All I could hear was a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The spoon I was holding suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. 4. "Of course," she continued, finally looking up, but not at me. She was looking at her fresh manicure. "We're going to need you full-time. I guess you'll have to quit that little part-time job at the library." I couldn't sleep that night. Tiffany had gone up to her room right after her announcement, leaving me alone in the cold kitchen. I just sat there, on that hard wooden chair, staring at the ketchup stain I'd half scrubbed. The initial shock had passed, leaving behind a dull, hollow ache. I heard the front door open. It was Michael, my son, finally home from a 12-hour shift. He walked into the kitchen, saw me sitting there in the dark. "Mom, you're still up?" he asked, his voice heavy with his own exhaustion. I just looked at him. "Tiffany told me," he continued, avoiding my eyes. It's just one more, Mom. Don't you love the grandkids?" That line, the one they had both used as a weapon for 6 years. This time, sorry. It didn't make me feel guilty. It just made me tired. I remembered the day I agreed to watch Lily. "Just for a little while, Mom," he'd said, "just until we get on our feet." 6 years? Was 6 years a little while? I didn't say anything. I just stood up, and for the first time I walked straight to my room, leaving him standing alone in the kitchen. I closed the door. The quiet in my room felt heavy. I didn't turn on the light, just sat at my desk where the moonlight was bright enough to see. I opened the drawer and pulled out my old expense log. I didn't need to look closely. I remembered every entry, $52,000. The number danced in front of my eyes. That was the money for swimming lessons, for baby formula, for winter coats. It was the gas money for the endless trips to the park. And it was the money I was supposed to have used for that trip to the Grand Canyon with my church group, the trip I had to cancel. It was the lunches with friends I never went to. I had lost my entire social life. I looked down at my own hands in the pale light, at the knuckles swollen from my arthritis, and I wondered, I had sacrificed my knees, my back, and my golden years of retirement. For what? So Tiffany could go to expensive restaurants and buy new handbags, while I used my savings to buy diapers? The sadness started to curdle into something else, something bitter and sharp. I started to remember. I saw the pattern. Tiffany was always at her sweetest, always, "Mom, you're the best," right before she needed money, or right before she announced a surprise weekend getaway without the kids. Michael was always absent, always tired, and always used my love for the children to shut down any complaint I had. They didn't need a mother or a grandmother. They needed a free nanny, a housekeeper, and an ATM. The guilt I had been carrying for 6 years, it wasn't mine. It was theirs. They had planted it in me. Baby number 4. No, not this time. The exhaustion turned into a cold, clear anger. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just took a deep breath, and I felt a spine of steel slide into place. "Enough," I said to the quiet room. That was the night I decided to take my life back. The next morning, I woke up at 9 o'clock, not at 5:30, to the sound of Chloe crying, or to make breakfast for Mason. The sun was high, streaming warm stripes of light through the blinds, and the house, it was silent. A beautiful, absolute silence. I realized it was the first time in 6 years I had woken up without a low-level panic about the kids' schedule. The ache in my back was still there, but there was an impossible lightness in my chest. I went to the kitchen and made a cup of coffee. Not the instant kind I'd been chugging down for years, but the good whole bean coffee I kept hidden in the back of the pantry. I sat by the window, took a sip, and just felt the heat and the aroma. I didn't have to rush. I wasn't watching anyone. I just sat there, watching the leaves drift down in the yard. I decided that today I wasn't doing housekeeping. I wasn't going grocery shopping. I was going to do something for Betty. I put on my best sweater, slipped my feet into my walking shoes, and walked out the door. I drove to the outdoor mall, not to Target or Walmart for diapers. I walked straight into Talbot's. How long had it been since I bought myself a new piece of clothing? I'd been living in the same rotation of stretchy pants and old t-shirts for 6 years. I looked at the cashmere sweaters, the colorful silk scarves. I didn't buy anything right away. I just enjoyed the act of looking. Afterward, I went to Barnes & Noble. The smell of new books always calmed me. I used to be such a reader, but for the last 6 years the only book I'd read was The Very Hungry Caterpillar. I picked out a new bestseller I'd seen advertised, a book just for adults, just for me. I even stopped at the shoe store and tried on a new pair of Skechers, the kind with the really good cushioning for my arthritis. Just trying them on felt like an indulgence. It felt so strange, spending money on myself. After I bought the book, I didn't go home. I stopped at a little cafe, ordered a latte and a croissant. I sat at a table outside, feeling the cool California air. I opened my new book. I read 5 whole pages without an interruption. And then I did something I had put off for far too long. I took out my phone and found a name in my contacts I hadn't called in a year. Brenda. Brenda was my best friend from the book club. We used to have lunch every Thursday. I had canceled on her so many times that eventually she just stopped calling. My heart beat a little faster as I hit the call button. Betty? Her voice on the other end was pure surprise. Oh my goodness, Betty, you're alive? I laughed, a real genuine laugh. I'm here, I said. I'm so sorry I disappeared. Are you free for lunch this Thursday? There was a pause, and then Brenda nearly shouted, I'll cancel anything I have, of course. When I hung up, I realized tears were streaming down my face. They weren't tears of sadness, it was hope. My peace lasted exactly 2 days. 2 days where I got to take my walks, read my book, and just breathe. And then the phone rang. I was sitting on the back porch, trying to enjoy an iced tea, when the name Tiffany lit up the screen. My stomach clenched instantly. It was a 6-year conditioned reflex. Part of me wanted to throw the phone into the yard. The other part knew I couldn't hide forever. I took a deep breath, gathered that fragile new steel I'd been building for 48 hours, and I hit the answer button. Hello? My voice was shakier than I wanted. Mom! Tiffany's voice chirped, sickly sweet. I knew that voice. It was the voice she used right before she was about to ask for something. Oh my God, I was so worried. You didn't come over. You didn't call. The kids have been asking where you are. I closed my eyes, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the armrest of the chair. The kids, her trump card. She always started with the kids. I stayed quiet. I'd learned that my silence usually forced her to show her hand faster. I just don't know what I'm going to do, Mom, she continued, a pathetic little whine in her voice. I could picture her pouting. Michael's working constantly. This new baby. It's just exhausting me. I can barely lift a finger, and the kids, they just miss you so much. She paused, waiting. This was the moment where the old Betty was supposed to jump in. Oh, you poor thing, of course I'll be right over. But the new Betty was remembering $52,000 and 2 aching knees. I'm sorry you're feeling tired, Tiffany, I said, and I was surprised at how calm my voice sounded, almost cold. But I can't come over. There was a pause on the other end, a heavy, stunned silence. I had never, ever said no to her. Not once. What did you say? She stammered, the sweetness already starting to curdle. I said I can't come over, I repeated, my voice clearer this time. I need time to rest. I'm not well enough to do this anymore. The silence was gone now, replaced by a sharp, disbelieving scoff. Rest? Tiffany repeated, her voice now completely stripped of its fake sugar. It was just sharp, jagged metal. You're retired. What do you do all day? These are your grandchildren. And then she went for the kill, the same move my son had tried. Or do you just not love them anymore? Is that it, Betty? Are you punishing them just because of the new baby? You know how much they love you. Mason has been crying for his grandma all night. I heard her call out, away from the phone. Mason, Mason, come here, talk to Grandma. My blood went from cold to boiling in a nanosecond. She was weaponizing the very children I had poured my life into. That familiar, ugly wave of guilt tried to rise up in my chest, but this time the anger was bigger. This wasn't just irresponsibility, this was cruelty. She was trying to break my will by using her own children. "Don't do that, Tiffany," I said, and my voice was steely now, all the shaking gone. "Don't use the kids like that." "Use them?" she shrieked, all pretense gone. "I'm just trying to get you to be a grandmother." "No," I cut her off, and I stood up from the chair. "My responsibility is to take care of myself. I have done my part. I will not be watching the fourth baby." I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't give her another chance to scream or manipulate or cry. I hit the end call button. My hand was trembling. My heart was pounding like a drum, but it wasn't from fear. It was adrenaline. I had done it. I had said no. It felt terrifying, but mixed in with that was this powerful, soaring feeling of freedom. I had set my first boundary. I'm sure many of you have been in that same impossible spot where family love gets twisted into an obligation. Have you ever had to say no just to save yourself? I had the best lunch I'd had in years with Brenda. We laughed. We made plans to rejoin the book club. I felt like I was coming back to life. But as I drove home, that peaceful feeling evaporated. Tiffany's SUV was parked at my curb. She wasn't alone. Another car was parked right behind it, and I recognized it as her sister Sharon's. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. This wasn't a visit. This was an ambush. I had barely stepped out of my car before Tiffany was marching toward me, her face flushed and blotchy. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she shrieked. No greeting, no preamble. "You can't just disappear. Who was supposed to watch the kids?" Her sister Sharon, a woman I'd only met a few times at holiday parties, stood with her arms crossed looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "That's right, Betty," Sharon chimed in, her voice just as harsh. "Tiffany is pregnant. She needs her rest. You're being incredibly selfish." They were standing on my lawn, blocking my front path, shouting for all my neighbors to see. My cheeks burned. I tried to stay calm, fumbling with my house keys. "I'm not having this conversation out here," I said, my voice trembling. "This is a private, family matter." "Family?" Tiffany laughed, a nasty, sharp sound. "You're not acting like family." As I finally got the key into the lock, she physically pushed me aside, not hard enough to make me fall, but enough to send me stumbling off balance, and opened the door herself. I stared, horrified. She still had her key, the key I gave her 6 years ago for emergencies. And now, the emergency was that I had finally said no. Both women stormed right into my living room, into my quiet, safe home. "We are settling this right now," Tiffany announced, throwing herself into my favorite armchair, the one I just sat in that morning with my coffee. "You are going to keep watching the kids, and you are going to watch the new one. End of story." The violation of it, the entitlement of them invading my space, made my skin crawl. My home wasn't safe anymore. The next day, I tried to reclaim some shred of normalcy. I went to my part-time job at the library. It was my sanctuary, a place of books and quiet. I was shelving returns in the history section when I heard it, shouting, then a child wailing, then I heard Tiffany's voice echoing across the normally silent space. "I just don't know what to do. I have no help." I ran toward the main desk, and the scene in front of me made my blood run cold. Tiffany was standing there, holding a screaming Chloe. Mason and Lily stood beside her, their clothes wrinkled, their faces smudged with dirt. "Grandma!" Mason yelled when he saw me. Tiffany turned to me, tears, crocodile tears. I knew them well, streaming down her face, speaking loudly enough for everyone in the library to hear. "Oh, thank God, Mom Betty. I just can't cope. The kids miss you. They haven't even had breakfast." Everyone was staring. My coworkers, the library regulars. My face was on fire. This was a calculated theatrical performance. "Tiffany," I hissed, trying to keep my voice as low as possible. "What are you doing here? This is my job." "But I didn't know where else to go," she sobbed. "Michael's at work and you abandoned us." Abandoned. She used that word. In public. Lily, the oldest, just looked terrified and confused. "Grandma, are you mad at us?" she whispered. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I tried to step toward the kids, but Tiffany recoiled, pulling Chloe tighter. "No, you can't just come and go. You're confusing them." My manager, Mrs. Davies, a kind, no-nonsense woman, stepped out. "Miss Tiffany," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "this is not the appropriate place. I must ask you to take the children outside." Tiffany shot Mrs. Davies a look, then glared at me with pure venom. She had gotten what she wanted. She had successfully painted me as a cruel, neglectful old woman in front of everyone. I had to ask to leave early, unable to stand the pitying, curious stares I felt on my back. I had just gotten home, my hands still shaking from the humiliation, when I heard a knock on my door. Not a normal knock. It was forceful and official. I opened it, and my heart dropped into my stomach. 2 police officers were standing on my porch. "Ma'am, are you Betty?" one of them asked. I nodded, unable to speak. "We received a call alleging child neglect. Someone reported that you are the primary guardian for 3 minors and that you've refused to care for them, putting them in an endangered situation." Child neglect. The police. At my house. I couldn't breathe. No. That's a misunderstanding," I stammered. "They're my grandchildren. I'm not their guardian. My son and daughter-in-law are their parents." The officers looked at each other, their faces stern. They had to come in. They had to ask questions. I, a 67-year-old, law-abiding citizen, was explaining to the police that I was not a criminal. Tiffany did this. She had weaponized the law itself to drag me back. That night, long after the officers had left, they seemed to understand the situation, but still had to file a report. Michael called. I was expecting an apology, or at least embarrassment. I got neither. "Mom!" he roared into the phone. "What the hell are you doing? You made Tiffany call the cops. Do you have any idea how that looks for my job if they start investigating my family?" That was the final string. The rage I had swallowed for 6 years, the rage over the $52,000, the bad back, the broken promises, his sheer cowardice, it all exploded. "You're asking me?" I screamed, my voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger. "Where were you, Michael? Where were you when I was using my retirement savings to buy food for your children? Where were you when your wife was out buying designer bags and I was canceling my knee surgery? I raised you. I did my job, and I will not be treated like a criminal in my own home." "I gave 6 years of my life to your family," I kept screaming, the tears finally coming, hot and angry. "I gave up my trips. I gave up my friends. I gave up everything. And for what? To be called neglectful? To be humiliated at my job? What am I to you people? A machine? A slave? I could hear Tiffany in the background, shouting something about me losing it. You hear that, Michael? I said, my voice now raw from yelling. That's your choice. You chose her. You let her treat me this way. You are just as bad as she is. There was a dead, shocked silence on his end. He had no idea what to say. He had never, ever heard me speak like this. I didn't give him the chance to answer. I slammed the phone down. I collapsed against the kitchen counter, my whole body shaking, utterly exhausted but lighter. I had finally said it. My explosion only made Tiffany more ruthless. She started a systematic smear campaign. The calls started coming. First, from my own sister Sharon. Her voice was filled with a nervous concern. Betty, I just talked to Tiffany. The poor girl was sobbing. She said you're not well. She said you were screaming and throwing things. I was stunned. I just, you don't understand. I think you need help, my sister said. Tiffany is worried you might have early onset Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's. They dared. Then came the other family members. My sister-in-law, my cousins. Tiffany had called them all, painting a picture of me as a sad, pathetic old woman who was losing her mind, becoming aggressive and dangerous. She wasn't just trying to get her nanny back. She was trying to completely destroy my credibility and my sanity. I knew I had to see the kids. I needed them to know I loved them. I still had a dentist appointment for Lily that I had booked and paid for months ago. I thought, at least I can pick her up, take her, and explain things gently. I drove to the elementary school at pickup time, walked straight into the office. I'm here to pick up Lily, I told the secretary. She looked up at me with an embarrassed pity. Mrs. Betty, I'm so sorry. We've received express instructions from her mother, Tiffany. You're not authorized to pick up the children anymore. I felt the blood drain from my face. But I'm their grandmother. I've picked them up hundreds of times. I'm sorry, she repeated, avoiding my eyes. Miss Tiffany said that you were unstable and that you were harassing the family. Harassing. She had blocked me at every turn. She had made me a dangerous stranger to my own grandchildren. My anger was ice cold now. I drove straight to their house. I didn't even turn off the engine. I walked to the door and hammered on the doorbell. Tiffany opened it, a smug, victorious look on her face. What do you want? I'll call the police for trespassing. You've gone too far, Tiffany, I said, my voice low and dangerous. The police? My family? The school? What are you doing? She smiled, a slow, contemptuous smirk. I'm doing what I have to do. You chose this. Give me my key, I demanded. What? My house key. Now. You think you can order me around? She scoffed, and then she said the one thing I will never forget. You should be careful, old woman. The way this is going, she glanced down at her pregnant belly. Michael is your only son. All your assets, this house, your savings, it's all going to be ours in the end anyway. You're just making it harder on yourself. I stared at her, finally seeing the monster in plain view. I turned and walked away as she screamed after me. You're going to regret this. I'll see to it that you die alone. Tiffany's words echoed in my head as I drove home, her voice dripping with a venom that chilled me to the bone. All your assets, this house, your savings, It's all going to be ours in the end anyway. The world outside my car window was a blur. I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly my swollen knuckles had turned white. She didn't just want a nanny. She wanted everything. She wanted my home, the one I had shared with my late husband. She wanted my retirement, the money I had painstakingly saved. And she wanted me to die alone. For the first time, I saw everything with a terrifying crystal clarity. This was not a family disagreement. This was abuse. The lies about Alzheimer's, that wasn't just a cruel random insult. It was a strategy. It was the first step someone takes to prove you're incompetent, the first step toward getting power of attorney, toward seizing control of your finances, of your life. The call to the police, the public humiliation at the library, they were all tactics. She wasn't trying to convince me. She was trying to destroy me. She was building a case to prove I was an unfit, unstable old woman so she could take everything. The trembling rage from our confrontation vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I was not losing my mind. I was being attacked. And you don't fight an attack like this with family sentiment. You fight it with a professional. I didn't need a therapist. I needed a lawyer. I had heard of elder abuse support groups. I never, in a million years, thought I would be one of them. I was Betty. I made casseroles. I volunteered at the library. I wasn't a victim, but I'd secretly, almost shamefully, pocketed a flyer from the community center months ago after seeing a presentation. I found it tucked in my desk drawer under my old checkbooks. My hand was shaking as I dialed the number for the hotline. The woman on the other end of the line was the first person in 6 years to just listen. She listened for 10 straight minutes without interrupting me, without telling me I was overreacting, without saying, "But they're family." And then she gave me a name, Joe. He wasn't a standard family lawyer. His entire specialty was elder rights and financial abuse. A week ago, I was worried about what brand of diapers to buy. This week, I was booking an appointment with an elder abuse attorney. When I walked into his office the next day, I was carrying a heavy, invisible load of shame. I felt so stupid, so foolish for letting it get this far, for being so blind. The office was in a nice, quiet building downtown. I felt like every person in the elevator was looking at me, like they knew I was a fool. Joe, a man in his 60s with kind eyes that looked tired, like he'd heard my story 1,000 times before, motioned for me to sit. He didn't rush me. He just waited. "Mrs. Betty," he said, and his voice was gentle but firm. "Before you say a word, let me tell you something. You are not stupid. You are a kind mother and a grandmother, and your kindness has been weaponized against you." I broke down. For 5 minutes, I just cried. Then I told him everything. I laid it all out like a case file. The 6 years, the $52,000, which I was now sure I'd never see again, the threats, the police incident, and the humiliation of it, the scene at the school, being barred from my own grandchildren, the Alzheimer's accusation, the final horrifying threat about my assets. When I finished, I held my breath, half waiting for him to tell me I was overreacting, that it was a family matter. Instead, Joe just nodded slowly, writing notes on a yellow legal pad. "Mrs. Betty, I want you to hear this clearly," he said, looking up. "Legally, you have zero obligation to babysit your grandchildren. No court in California or any state can force you to do that. He was confirming the very thing I'd always suspected but was too guilt-ridden to believe. What they are doing, he continued, his voice hardening, is a classic textbook case of elder emotional and financial abuse. The police call and the lies to your family about Alzheimer's are textbook intimidation tactics designed to force your compliance and isolate you from your support system. They are trying to build a case that you are incompetent. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could actually breathe. I wasn't crazy. I was a victim. And now I had an ally. Joe immediately began drafting a formal legal letter to be sent to them, refuting every allegation and issuing a cease and desist from all harassment. First thing, Joe said, his tone shifting from empathetic to practical. We must secure you physically. He gave me a list. I felt like I was being given a battle plan. Tiffany's threat and her absolute entitlement in using her own key to barge into my home had shattered my sense of safety. The minute I left Joe's office, I didn't go home. I drove straight to Home Depot. The smell of sawdust and cut pine felt grounding. I walked down the aisle of locks, a long, overwhelming wall of shiny brass and steel. It felt surreal. But I wasn't just buying a lock, I was buying my safety. I bought the best lock set they had, the heavy-duty, grade 1 deadbolt. I didn't try to install it myself. I called a professional locksmith. He was at my house that afternoon, a quiet, efficient man who didn't ask any questions. I stood and watched as he dismantled the old lock, the one Tiffany had a key to. The sound of the drill and the scraping metal felt final, like an exorcism. Then he installed the new one, fitting the heavy steel plates into my door frame. He handed me a small box with 3 brand new shiny keys. Just you, he said. That night, when I came home from a walk, I put the new key in the lock. It felt different, solid. I turned it and heard the solid, heavy thunk of the steel bolt sliding into place. I leaned my back against the door and closed my eyes. I was safe, at least physically. But locks weren't enough. Tiffany was the type to stand on the porch and scream, to cause a scene. Joe's next piece of advice was document everything. He said, if she's willing to lie about Alzheimer's, she's willing to lie about anything. We need objective truth. So the next day, I went to the electronics store. I bought a simple security system, a video doorbell, and 2 small motion-activated cameras for the front yard and the driveway. I had the young man next door, the one I always paid to help with my garden, come over and install them. Suddenly, I had eyes. I could see from my phone who was at my front door. That sudden, heart-stopping fear of an unexpected knock was gone. I was in control of who was allowed to even approach my home. If Tiffany decided to stage another play on my lawn, to scream that I was crazy, my cameras would be recording the objective truth. My defense system was coming together. The physical wall was up. The next wall was financial. Tiffany's slip-up about my assets had shown me her real target. Joe had been very clear about this. Secure your money, now. On Monday morning, I went to a different bank. Not my old branch, where the tellers knew me and my son. A brand new bank on the other side of town, one my family knew nothing about. I sat down with a personal banker, a young woman who was patient and kind. I opened a new checking and a new savings account, my name only. Then I made the hardest, most tedious calls. I sat in my car in the bank's parking lot so I could do it in private. I called the Social Security Administration. I called my pension fund manager. I spent over an hour on hold, being transferred from department to department, but I did it. I rerouted all of my direct deposits to the new private account. Then, I went back inside and transferred the bulk of my remaining savings out of the old bank, leaving only a minimum balance. Finally, I called my credit card company. I canceled the supplementary card I had given Michael for kid emergencies all those years ago. It was a card he and Tiffany had accidentally used for groceries, then gas, then online shopping. Canceling it felt like cutting a cord. The banker asked me if I wanted temporary checks. Yes, please, I said. Holding that new checkbook with only my name on it, I felt like I had just reclaimed a huge, vital piece of my life. The final act was the most painful, but the most necessary. It was the digital wall. Since my screaming match with Michael, my phone had become a weapon used against me. Not by him, he was a coward, he stayed silent, but by the relatives Tiffany had poisoned. Texts filled with judgment and concern trolling. My sister texting, "Betty, I'm praying for you. This isn't like you. Just apologize to that poor, pregnant girl." My sister-in-law, "You're tearing this family apart over a little babysitting." And then there were the texts from Tiffany herself. Pictures of the kids crying, sent with no context, just a caption. "Look what you're doing to them." I sat in my armchair, the one Tiffany had tried to claim, and I looked at the phone. It felt like a bomb. I opened my contacts. I found the name Tiffany. I hit the block button. The feeling was sudden, sharp. Then I scrolled down. Michael, my son. My hand hovered over the name for 5 long minutes. I saw him as a little boy with a skinned knee, running to me for a hug. My heart ached with a physical pain, but then I remembered his voice on the phone. "Don't you love them?" I remembered his weak, cowardly silence as his wife called me crazy, as she called the police on me. He had made his choice. I took a deep breath and I hit block. I went down the list. My sister, my sister-in-law, every cousin who had called to judge me, everyone who had chosen her lies over my decades of truth. Block, block, block. My phone went silent, and for the first time in weeks, that silence felt safe. After I'd built my defenses, the new locks, the cameras, the private bank accounts, I felt physically safer, but I was trembling on the inside. I had blocked my entire family, my son, my sister. The silence in my house, which I had fought so hard for, now felt heavy, suffocating. I was so used to the chaos of the children, the constant noise, the needs. And now, this quiet, while chosen, felt like the loneliest thing in the world. It was an isolation I had inflicted on myself as the only cure for the isolation they had forced on me. It was a terrible, hollow victory. The next morning, I was drinking coffee and staring out the window, wondering what the rest of my life was going to look like, when I heard a knock. My heart leapt into my throat. But it wasn't the angry, hammering fist I had been dreading. It wasn't Tiffany. It was a soft, almost hesitant tap. My eyes darted to my phone, to the new video doorbell feed. It was Monica, my 62-year-old neighbor from across the street. We weren't friends. We were wave across the driveway neighbors. We'd lived opposite each other for a decade, and had probably exchanged fewer than 100 words. I watched her on the screen, my hand frozen. My first paranoid thought was, is this a trick? Did Tiffany send her? Is she part of the smear campaign? Monica stood there patiently, not looking at her phone, just holding 2 large paper coffee cups. She looked kind. I took a deep, shuddering breath and undid the heavy deadbolt. Hi, Monica, I said, my voice wary, my body half blocking the doorway. Hi, Betty, she said, giving me a gentle, understanding smile. It wasn't a smile of pity, it was a smile of recognition. Well, it looks like you've had a stressful week over here. She lifted the coffee cups in a small gesture. I made a whole pot, and my husband's out golfing. I hate to drink alone. Do you mind if I join you for a few minutes? I looked at her, at this near stranger offering a simple kindness, and felt a crack in the ice I'd built around myself. I stepped aside. Please, come in. She walked into my kitchen, and the entire atmosphere in the house seemed to lift, to warm up. She set the coffee cup in front of me. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd collapsed in a heap after the call with Michael, and for a long moment, we just sipped our coffee in silence. It wasn't awkward, it was peaceful. I saw the police, Monica said quietly, not looking at me, but at her cup. And I've heard some of the shouting. She finally turned her gratitude to me, and her eyes were so full of a knowing sadness, it took my breath away. You look, she said, her voice soft, exactly how I looked 6 years ago. I just stared at her. What? 6 years ago, she continued, I was a few months away from losing this house. I was trying to help my son and his wife after their first baby was born. My help turned into me draining my 401k to pay for their car lease. My help turned into me co-signing for a loan they defaulted on. My help turned into me babysitting every single day while my own health was failing. I sat there, frozen, as I listened to her tell my story, but with different names. The subtle exploitation, the weaponized guilt, the you're the only one who can do this, mom, the constant state of financial and emotional emergency. My breaking point, she said, was when my daughter-in-law told me they'd be disappointed if I didn't sell my house to move in with them, as a built-in nanny, and, as I later learned, as their primary bank. They called it Elder Financial and Emotional Abuses. When I finally went to a support group, Betty, she said, reaching across the table and placing her hand on my arm, it has a name. What's happening to you? It's real, and it has a name. You are not crazy. You are not a bad grandmother. You are a good person who was taken advantage of by people who see your kindness as a weakness. That was when I broke. I put my head in my hands and I sobbed. I wept for the $52,000, for my knees, for the years I had lost. But for the first time, they were tears of relief, not despair. Someone understood. Someone had walked this exact path and had come out the other side. I wasn't alone. That conversation with Monica was like a suit of armor. I didn't cancel my lunch with Brenda. I needed it. When I walked into our favorite old diner, the one we'd been going to for decades, Brenda was already in our regular booth with a Diet Coke waiting for me. She took one look at my face. My God, Betty, she said, her usual cheerful sarcasm gone, replaced with pure concern. You look like you've been to war. What in God's name has happened? And I told her, I told her everything, not the clean, polite version, the real version, the 6 years, the $52,000, the announcement of the fourth baby, the public humiliation at the library, the police at my door, the lies about Alzheimer's, the final awful threat about my assets. When I finished, Brenda was silent. She just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then she looked down at her menu, closed it, and said with a quiet, icy fury, "That little bitch." A wild, startled laugh bubbled out of me. It was so perfectly bluntly Brenda. "Betty," she said, her voice now deadly serious, and she gripped my hand across the table. "You hired that lawyer, Joe. That's good. That's smart. Now you listen to me. I have known you for 40 years. I watched you raise Michael. I know what you sacrificed for that boy. I was there when your husband passed, and I know you're the most capable, sane, and kind woman I have ever met. If that little monster or your son or anyone in your family who believed her dares to whisper the word Alzheimer's or unstable, I will be the first one in that courtroom. I will be your star witness. I'll write an affidavit this afternoon. I will personally call your sister and tell her exactly what I think of her. You are not alone in this. Do you hear me? I am right here. I am on your side. 100%. That promise, that fierce, unshakable loyalty from a 40-year friendship, it was worth more than gold. I sat there, holding my friend's hand, with the validation from my neighbor still warming my heart. The walls Tiffany had built to isolate me were crumbling. I wasn't just a victim in a house. I had allies. I was no longer alone. My lawyer, Joe, had given me homework. He'd asked me to gather every piece of financial documentation keys I had from the last 6 years, every bank statement, every utility bill, every receipt I could find, anything that could help prove the $52,000 I'd spent. I spent the entire weekend in my small home office, sifting through mountains of paper that represented my life's bleed out. It was heartbreaking, one paper cut at a time. Giant receipts from Costco, mostly for diapers and formula. Credit card statements showing endless charges for kids' clothing, swimming lessons, soccer camp, all paid from my account. I got down on my hands and knees, my joints protesting, to pull out a dusty file box from under the desk. It was labeled, in my own handwriting, Michael, 2018. It was from that brief, chaotic period 6 years ago when Michael and Tiffany had moved in with me right after Lily was born, before they got their own place. I'd kept some of their mail and important papers that got mixed in with mine. I was just going to skim it to see if a utility bill or something was in there, and that's when I saw it. Tucked between an old warranty manual and a notebook, there was a single, official-looking bank envelope. It wasn't mine. It was addressed to Tiffany Miller. Miller, her maiden name, and it was addressed to my house. It looked like it had never even been opened. My heart gave a single hard thump. It's just junk mail, I told myself. But why her maiden name? And why was it in a box from 2018? I looked closer. The postmark was smudged, but it didn't look old. My curiosity and Joe's instruction to check everything made me slide my finger under the flap and tear it open. It was a bank statement, a savings account from some online-only bank I'd never heard of. I glanced at the date in the top corner. It was dated 3 months ago. 3 months? How was a letter from 3 months ago in a box labeled 2018? And why, dear God, Why was it still being sent to my address? Had she just never updated it? Or was it deliberate? A secret account hidden from Michael, using her maiden name and my address as a blind? I unfolded the paper, and that's when the air left my lungs. My vision swam. I fumbled for my reading glasses, my hands shaking. The number in the ending balance box seemed to be mocking me. $80,000. $80,000. I almost fell out of my chair. $80,000. This entire time. All the crying, all the, "We're struggling so much, Mom." All the, "We just can't afford formula this week." While I was pulling money from my retirement, the money I needed for my own future to pay their electric bill so the heat wouldn't be shut off, she had this. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a rainy day fund. I forced my eyes to scan the transaction history. There were regular weekly deposits going in, but it was the withdrawals that made me feel truly sick. They weren't many, but they were specific. Nordstrom, Sephora, Coach, Delta Airlines, Las Vegas. This wasn't just irresponsibility. This was a con. This was a calculated, cold-blooded deception. She had been siphoning money from where? Michael's paycheck? While simultaneously draining me, a 67-year-old woman, to pay for her children's basic needs. She was using me as the household budget so she could build her own secret luxury nest egg. I lurched out of the chair and barely made it to the bathroom before I was violently sick. It wasn't anger I felt. It was a profound, bottom-of-the-soul disgust. I had held her children. I had loved them. I had rocked them to sleep when they were feverish. And all that time, their mother, the woman I had welcomed into my family, was playing me for a fool. A gullible golden goose fool. All the lies. "We're barely keeping our heads above water, Mom. Just this one last time, I promise. You're our lifesaver." Every single word was a lie. And then the final, terrible piece clicked into place. The accusation of Alzheimer's, the police at my door. It all made a sick, perfect sense now. She wasn't just trying to get her nanny back. She was trying to discredit me. She was afraid I was getting too defiant, that I was slipping the leash. She was afraid I might find this. She needed me to be crazy. She needed me to be unstable, so that if I ever did find this, if I ever told Michael or anyone else, no one would believe me. Every last shred of compassion I had for her, every illusion I'd held on to about the family I was trying to save, it all shattered into dust. As soon as the trembling stopped, I moved. I didn't call Michael. I didn't drive to her house. I took that statement, put it in a fresh envelope, and drove to the office supply store. I didn't just make one copy. I made 3. One for me, one for Joe, and one to be hidden away. I went home, fired up my old scanner, and scanned every single page in high-resolution color. I attached the file to a new email. I wrote a clear, simple subject line: financial abuse proof. I sent it to Joe. When I hit send, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel rage. I felt a bolt-hard clarity. This was no longer my word against hers. This was no longer a messy family spat. This was irrefutable black and white proof. This was my secret weapon. The game had just changed. After I hit send on that email to Joe, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt a soul-deep exhaustion, heavier than all 6 years combined. The discovery of the $80,000, that cold, hard proof of a long con, it was the final stone that crushed what little strength I had left. I had braced myself to fight manipulation, to fight intimidation. I was not prepared to fight a cold, calculated, long-term fraud. That night, I couldn't stay in my own house. The walls, the ones I just secured with new locks and cameras, suddenly felt like a prison. Every shadow felt like a betrayal. I needed air. I needed a place that held no memory of Tiffany, no echo of her lies. I grabbed my car keys, not even knowing where I was going, and I just drove. My hands guided the car toward the coast. I found myself at the little park at Point Lobos, the place David, my late husband, and I used to go for every anniversary. It was late afternoon, and the air was sharp with salt and cold. Only a few people were out, walking their dogs against the wind. I found our bench, the wooden one that looked straight out over the Pacific. I sat, pulling my thin sweater tighter. David has been gone for 10 years, but here I've always felt him the closest. "Oh, David," I whispered to the sound of the crashing waves, "I've made such a mess of things." I sat there, and I told him everything. I told him about Michael, about how our son had stood by and let his wife treat his mother this way. I told him about the grandchildren he would never meet, how beautiful they were, and how much I loved them. And then I cried. I confessed the one thing that felt like my deepest failure. "It was our money, David," I wept. "The $52,000, the money you worked your whole life for, the money we saved so we could be comfortable, so we could be safe. And I just let her take it. I let it all slip away." It was a profound, aching sadness, a failure, a desperate longing for a simpler, long gone time when he was here and the world made sense. I sat there for a long time, just letting the waves wash away the shame. And then, as clear as day, I could almost hear his voice. Not his actual voice, but the memory of it. David was a Marine, a quiet, decent man who was allergic to injustice. He couldn't stand a bully. I remembered a time, so long ago, when Michael was being picked on by an older boy at school. David didn't call the principal. He took Michael out in the backyard and taught him how to stand, how to look that bully in the eye. "Don't you ever let anyone walk on you, Bet," I could almost hear him say, his voice rumbling and warm. "And don't you ever let them mistake your kindness for weakness." A realization settled over me, as calm and as vast as the ocean in front of me. David wouldn't be mad about the money. He'd be furious that I had let them treat me this way for so long. He'd be angry that I had allowed such profound disrespect to live under the roof we had built together. His love, his memory, it wasn't a judgment. It was permission. Permission to be angry. Permission to fight back. I took a deep breath. The salt air didn't feel cold anymore. It felt clarifying. This wasn't just my fight. This was a fight for our legacy, our name, the honor of our family. Tiffany wasn't just insulting me. She was defiling everything David and I had built. My resolve hardened. It wasn't the explosive rage from the phone call with Michael. It wasn't the cold panic from the police. It was a calm, steadfast, peaceful certainty. I would not let our son be ruined by this woman, and I would not let David's name, our name, be dragged through the mud by a greedy, soulless con artist. I stood up from the bench. I'm going to fix this, David, I said to the sea. I promise. As I drove home in the dark, I wasn't an exhausted victim anymore. I was a protector, and I was ready for whatever Tiffany was going to throw at me next. I thought blocking their numbers would be the end of the direct harassment. I thought I had built a fortress. I was so wrong. About a week later, I went to the mailbox. Tucked between a grocery flyer and a credit card offer was a letter. It wasn't a normal letter. It was in a thick, tan envelope, and the return address wasn't a person. It was an official embossed seal, the County of Los Angeles. My hands started to shake before I even opened it. I took it inside, sat at my kitchen table, and used a knife to slit the envelope, my heart pounding a strange, heavy rhythm. It was a notification, a formal, terrible notification from the Department of Social Services, specifically the Adult Protective Services Division. My heart didn't just stop. It felt like it fell through the floor. I had to read the first paragraph 3 times before the words would make sense. They had received, it said, a concerning report alleging self-neglect and citing signs of diminished mental capacity. Diminished mental capacity. The words Tiffany had planted with my family, now made official on a government document. The letter went on. It also mentioned a cross-report filed with Child Protective Services regarding the abandonment of minor children. Abandonment. They really did it. They had taken their lies to the police, to my family, and now to the government. They were using the full power of the state to paint me as a crazy, neglectful old woman. The house I had just secured, my fortress of new locks and cameras, felt instantly, ruthlessly invaded. I wasn't just being harassed, I was being investigated. The cold, bureaucratic language on that single piece of paper was a more profound violation than anything that had come before. I grabbed my phone and called Joe, my fingers fumbling on the screen. I couldn't even form a coherent sentence at first. I was just babbling. Joe, they called APS. They're saying I'm neglectful. Oh my God, Joe. Are they going to put me in a home? The word came out as a choked sob. That ultimate primal fear of every person my age, having your life, your home, yourself taken away. Betty, Betty, breathe. Joe's voice was a calm, steady anchor in my panic. I need you to take a deep breath, right now. I did, a ragged, shuddering gasp. Good, he said. Now listen to me. This is a tactic. It is a disgusting bottom-of-the-barrel tactic, but it is a predictable one. They are trying to create a paper trail to prove you are unstable. They are doing this to scare you into complying. This is what abusers do when they lose control. He explained that they would, by law, have to send a social worker to my home. Here is exactly what you are going to do, he said, his voice firm. You are going to be polite. You are going to be cooperative. You will let them in. You will answer their questions honestly and simply, but you will not volunteer a single piece of information you are not asked for. Do not tell your whole story. Do not cry. Do not get angry. You will be the very picture of a normal, lucid citizen who is being systemically harassed. They came on a Tuesday morning. I knew they were coming. They had called to schedule. I had spent 48 hours cleaning a house that was already clean. I vacuumed, I dusted, I polished. I made a fresh pot of coffee. I needed everything to be perfect. When the doorbell rang, I saw her approach on my video feed. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I opened the door. Miss Alvarez? A woman in her late 40s, with tired eyes and a professional but weary look, stood on my porch. I'm Betty, I said, forcing a calm I did not feel. I invited her in, my hands clenched so tightly in the pockets of my sweater my fingernails were biting into my palms. I offered her coffee. She politely declined. She sat on my sofa, and I sat in the armchair opposite, feeling like a butterfly pinned to a board. She pulled out a file. Mrs. Betty, she began, her voice neutral. We've received a report, as you know. The concerns stated are that you may be having difficulty with self-care, that you've seemed confused, forgetful, and have exhibited recent bouts of aggression. I swallowed the ball of acid in my throat. I remembered Joe's words, calm, simple, honest. I am not confused, Miss Alvarez, I said, my voice steady, amazing even myself. I am being harassed by my daughter-in-law. I assume she is the one who filed this report? Miss Alvarez just made a non-committal note. The report also states that you have refused to care for your grandchildren who were in your primary care, effectively abandoning them. This was it. I took a breath. I am their grandmother, I said, my voice as level as a plank of steel. I provided full-time, unpaid childcare for them for 6 years. During that time, I spent over $52,000 of my own retirement savings on their food, clothing, and activities. My doctor has recently informed me that I require replacement surgery on both of my knees. I informed my son and daughter-in-law that I was no longer physically capable of providing full-time care, especially as they are now expecting a 4th child. I am 67 years old, and my health no longer permits it. My inability to continue as a free nanny, I made sure to use that word, does not constitute abandonment. The children have 2 parents who are perfectly capable of caring for them. I even pointed to the security camera on my bookshelf. I had to install that system after my daughter-in-law forced her way into my home and threatened me. Miss Alvarez wrote everything down, her face giving nothing away. Then came the part that I will never, ever forget. Ma'am, I am required by my assessment protocol to, well, I need to see the rest of the house. It wasn't a question. Specifically, I need to see your kitchen and your bathroom. A wave of pure, hot humiliation washed over me. I felt my face flush. I had to stand there, like a child, while this stranger walked into my kitchen. She opened my refrigerator and looked inside. She was checking to see if I had food. She was checking to see if a 67-year-old woman knew how to buy groceries. Then we went to my bathroom. I had to stand in the hallway while she looked at my shower, at my toilet. She was checking, I realized, to see if it was clean, to see if I had soap, to see if I had toilet paper. I have lived for 67 years. I have paid my taxes. I have raised a son. I have buried a husband, and I was now being forced to prove to a government employee that I was still capable of bathing myself. It was the most profound, invasive, and degrading moment of my life. When she finally left, with a non-committal, "We will review this report," I closed the door, locked the new deadbolt, and leaned against it, shaking with a rage that was so deep it felt cold. Tiffany had found a way. She had weaponized the system. She had brought the fight, her lies, into my refrigerator, into my bathroom. She was using my own tax dollars to humiliate me. That visit was just the opening shot. The real world, in-person terror was just the setup for the legal one. A few days later, Joe called me. The calm, reassuring tone was gone. His voice was hard. "Betty, they just made their big move. Tiffany's lawyer has officially filed a petition with the court. They are requesting an emergency psychiatric evaluation." The air went out of my lungs. "What?" "They're using the APS report," he said, his voice sharp with anger. "Even though it's inconclusive, they're using the existence of the report as evidence that you are exhibiting diminished capacity and are a danger to yourself. They are formally requesting that the court order you to be evaluated by a specific doctor they have proposed." "Oh my God, Joe," I whispered. I had to sit down. "They're doing it. They're trying to get me declared incompetent. This is it. This is how they'll take control of my house, my situation, my assets, just like she threatened." "Calm down," Joe said, but I could hear the fight in his voice. "I've been on the phone for the last hour. I've already looked up the doctor they proposed. He's not a reputable geriatric specialist from Cedars-Sinai. He's a hired gun. He's a guy with a reputation in nasty family law cases for producing whatever findings the side that pays him wants. This is a trap, Betty. They want to get you into a room with their doctor, who will then file a report with the court stamping you as incompetent. It's a textbook dirty move." A chill, worse than any I'd felt, ran down my spine. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a calculated legal conspiracy to strip me of everything: my freedom, my money, and my very identity. They wanted to turn me into a ward of the state, an invalid, so they could sweep in and take it all. "So what do we do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from cracking into a million pieces. "We fight this, right?" "We're not going to refuse," Joe said. I was stunned. "What?" "Oh no," he said, and I could almost hear a grim smile in his voice. "Refusing makes us look guilty. It makes us look like we have something to hide. Instead, we are going to agree." I was completely lost. "Agree? Agree to their doctor?" "No," Joe said, the cleverness sharp in his voice. "I just finished drafting our response. We are enthusiastically agreeing to a full psychiatric evaluation because you are a perfectly lucid woman with nothing to hide. However, we are strenuously refusing their hired gun. Instead, we are demanding a truly independent evaluation to be performed by a board-certified, court-appointed geriatric psychiatrist. Or, we're happy to use a doctor from a world-class, neutral institution like UCLA's Department of Geriatrics or Cedars-Sinai, and we've offered to pay for half of it." I was silent for a moment, letting this new strategy sink in. It was brilliant. "What does that do, Joe?" "It means," he explained, "we've called their bluff. If they genuinely cared about your mental well-being, as they claim, they would have no reason to refuse an evaluation by a top neutral doctor. But if they refuse, if they fight to keep their doctor, they will expose this entire thing to the judge for what it is: a malicious, bad faith attempt to seize your assets. We just beat them at their own game, Betty. We've turned their own weapon against them." The feeling of powerlessness, the profound humiliation of that week, it all began to recede. My fury was replaced by a cold, steely resolve. I had been investigated. I had been degraded. I had been legally threatened with the loss of my own mind. But I was still standing. This battle had taken more than my money, more than my physical health. It had attacked the very core of who I am, my identity as a mother, a grandmother, a competent human being. Having to prove my sanity had exhausted me, but it had not broken me. It had, in fact, burned away the very last wisp of illusion I had about Michael and Tiffany. There was no more guilt. There was no more sadness. There was only a cold righteous anger and an unbreakable will. They had backed me into a corner, and they were about to find out firsthand that this 67-year-old woman doesn't crumble. My refusal to participate in their arranged psychiatric evaluation was met with about a week of silence. I knew it wasn't the end. It was the quiet before the storm. And then the storm arrived. It was a Thursday morning. I was on my front porch watering my ferns when a man in a uniform walked up the path. Not police, not the mailman. "Betty?" he asked. "Yes. I have legal documents to serve you." He handed me a thick sheaf of papers, clipped together in a manila envelope. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. This was it. No more threatening phone calls or dramatic scenes in the library. These were court papers. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I signed his little clipboard, feeling like I had just signed some kind of warrant. I went inside, closed the door, and just stared at the envelope. My heart was heavy with a thick, cold dread. The games were over. The real fight had just begun. I drove to Joe's office immediately. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't want to read those words alone. I placed it on his desk, and he nodded, his expression grim. "All right, Betty. Let's see what they want." He tore open the flap, and his experienced eyes scanned the pages, flying over the dense legal jargon. "Ah," he said, "just as I predicted. They couldn't make the incompetence angle stick. So now they're suing you." "Suing me? For what?" "A whole mess," he said. "They're alleging intentional infliction of emotional distress on Tiffany and the children. They're claiming your abrupt abandonment of your caregiving role has caused severe psychological harm. They're also alleging harassment for when you went to their home to demand your key back. Basically, they're painting a picture of you as a cruel, unstable grandmother on a campaign of revenge. They're asking for a permanent restraining order and, oh, there it is, $20,000 in punitive damages." My mouth fell open. They abused me. They took over $52,000 from me, and now they were suing me for $20,000? Joe let me sit with the shock for a moment. Then he spoke. "However, their lawyer called me this morning. He knows this suit is weak. He knows what I have." Joe tapped the file on his desk, the one with the $80,000 bank statement inside. "So," Joe continued, "they're making one last modest settlement offer before this goes to court. He said that if you agree to waive all claims to the $52,000 you spent and agree to a supervised visitation schedule with your grandchildren." "Supervised?" I cut in, the insult stinging. "Then they will generously drop this $20,000 lawsuit and the APS complaint. They want to avoid court at all costs, Betty. They're hoping you're just tired enough to take any deal to make this go away." It was a final slap in the face. They wanted me to admit I was a danger, and they wanted me to pay for the privilege by erasing their $52,000 debt. I looked at Joe. The anxiety, the tension I'd felt holding that envelope, it all just evaporated. In its place was a cold, quiet calm. I thought of David. I thought of my promise to him by the ocean. I thought of the humiliation of having to open my own refrigerator for a stranger from APS. "Joe," I said, my voice perfectly steady, "call that lawyer back. Tell him we reject their offer. Not only that, Tell him we aren't just going to dismiss their suit. We are going to formally countersue them right there in that courtroom." Joe raised an eyebrow, a small smile starting to form. "Countersue for what, Betty?" "For $54,600, I said. I had recalculated the exact number. "For financial abuse, for fraud, and for intentional infliction of emotional distress. You tell him I'll see them in court." The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. The night before, I met Joe, Monica, and Brenda at his office. It didn't feel like a legal meeting. It felt like a war council. Laid out on the conference table were all our weapons. Every single bank statement from my account for the past 6 years. An Excel spreadsheet detailing every dollar of the $54,600. The photos of the expensive designer handbags Tiffany had posted on social media, time-stamped to the same days I had paid for her groceries. Monica's sworn affidavit about the screaming she had witnessed. Brenda's testimony confirming my lucid state of mind for the past 40 years. And finally, set in its own separate envelope, was the secret weapon, the copy of Tiffany's $80,000 bank statement. "They don't know we have this," Joe said. "We hold it until the very end." I looked at my friends. I looked at my lawyer. I wasn't scared anymore. I was exhausted, but I was ready. "Tomorrow," I said, "we end this." I had never been to court before. I had hoped to live my entire life without ever setting foot in one. It wasn't a grand, soaring courtroom like you see on TV, but a small, stuffy family court proceeding room. It smelled like old coffee and floor wax. Brenda and Monica sat in the first row right behind me. I could feel their support, a warm presence at my back. My own hands were damp with sweat, but Joe was perfectly calm, arranging his papers with methodical care. And then the door opened, and they walked in. Tiffany, her pregnant belly now enormous, was being half guided, half supported by her lawyer. She was playing the part of the fragile, delicate victim, overwhelmed by stress. Michael followed behind her, looking thin and hollowed out. He wouldn't look at me. His eyes were glued to the floor. The entire room fell silent as the judge, a stern-looking woman named Judge O'Connor, entered. My heart felt like it was beating in my throat. Everything, 6 long years, was going to be decided right here. Tiffany's lawyer went first. He painted a picture of me as a controlling, mentally unstable grandmother who had joyfully promised to support her son's family, only to abruptly and cruelly yank that promise away the moment she heard about a 4th baby. He offered the APS report as proof that I was in cognitive decline. Then Tiffany was called to the stand. She cried. Real tears rolled down her cheeks. She told the judge that I had always been controlling, but had recently become frightening. She said I had screamed, thrown things, a blatant lie, and abandoned my grandchildren, leaving them with psychological trauma and nightly nightmares. She said the $54,600 were gifts I had given freely out of love, and that I was now trying to extort them because I was jealous of the new baby. I sat there, clenching my fists, my blood boiling. Joe just placed a hand on my arm. "Wait," he whispered. Joe stood up. His voice was deep and clear. "Miss Miller, you just testified that you are in a financially strained position, correct?" Tiffany sniffled. "Yes, extremely. Without my mother-in-law, we just didn't know how we'd cope." "Then," Joe continued, "can you please explain this credit card bill? A $1,200 handbag from Nordstrom, purchased on the same day that Mrs. Betty had to pay $800 for your children's winter clothes out of her retirement account? Tiffany's face tightened. I I have to look professional. Professional, Joe repeated. You also testified that Mrs. Betty abandoned your children. But isn't it true that she was providing 60 hours a week of unpaid care while you, according to your own social media posts, attended 52 happy hours and 14 weekend spa trips in the last year alone? Tiffany's lawyer shot up. Objection, irrelevant. It is entirely relevant, Your Honor, Joe said, his voice level. It speaks to who was truly abandoning these children. Then it was my turn. When I walked to the witness stand, I wasn't shaking anymore. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. I didn't look at Michael or Tiffany. I looked directly at Judge O'Connor. Joe didn't ask me much. He just said, Mrs. Betty, can you please tell the court your story? And I did. I told them about the 6 years. I told them about the 5:30 a.m. wake-ups, the aching knees, the empty promises. I talked about the $54,600. I presented the spreadsheets, the receipts for enormous grocery bills, the utility bills I had paid. I told her about having to cancel my surgery. I told her about the day Tiffany announced the 4th baby and casually told me to quit my job. I told her about the police being called to my home. I told her about being banned from my grandchildren's school. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I simply presented the truth, the cold, hard facts of the last 6 years. The entire courtroom was dead silent. Your Honor, Joe said when I had finished, the plaintiff has painted a picture of a struggling young family forced to rely on the charity of a grandmother, a family that is now suing for $20,000 due to undue stress. He paused, picking up a single envelope, which is why we find this particular document so puzzling. Joe handed a copy to the judge and one to Tiffany's lawyer. This is a bank statement from an online savings account in Miss Tiffany Miller's maiden name. The mailing address is listed as Mrs. Betty's home, a clear attempt to hide it from her own husband. Your Honor, I ask you to look at the balance. I heard Michael suck in a sharp breath. He ripped the paper from his lawyer's hand. Tiffany, he whispered, his face draining of all color. What is this? Tiffany stared at the paper, her mask of fragile weakness dissolving, replaced by the look of a cornered, panicked animal. The balance, Joe said, his voice ringing clearly through the room, is $80,000. Judge O'Connor looked up from the paper, her eyes like ice. Ms. Miller, can you explain this account? Tiffany's lawyer stammered. Your Honor, this is separate property. It has no bearing. It has every bearing, the judge snapped. You are suing for damages based on poverty while you are hiding $80,000. The second the judge's words hit the air, Tiffany let out a piercing shriek. She clutched her pregnant belly, doubling over. Oh, oh my God, she gasped. The pain, the baby. I think I'm in labor. It's the stress. See what you've done. Michael, in a panic, jumped to his feet. Her lawyer started yelling, demanding a recess, demanding an ambulance. The room exploded into chaos. I looked at Joe. He gave me a slight, grim nod. We had anticipated this performance. Judge O'Connor slammed her gavel down. Order! Her voice boomed, cutting through the noise. Bailiff, call for medical support if it is needed. However, this hearing is not adjourned. She stared directly at Tiffany, who was still moaning. Miss Miller, I see you are in distress, but I also see a bank statement that shows systemic deceit of both your mother-in-law and your husband. I see a frivolous lawsuit designed to intimidate a senior citizen. The cold finality in the judge's voice seemed to do what no medicine could. Tiffany's moans quieted. Your suit for $20,000, the judge declared, is dismissed immediately. She then turned to me. As for Mrs. Betty's countersuit, the court finds that she is the victim of profound financial and emotional abuse. The court rules in favor of Mrs. Betty for the full amount of $54,600 to be paid from the assets of both Mr. Michael and Mrs. Tiffany Miller, including the aforementioned $80,000 account. I let out a breath I didn't even know I had been holding. I had won. The tears finally came, not tears of pain or anger, but real tears, the tears of relief. It's been 6 months since that day in the courtroom, 6 months of real, actual peace. Joe made sure I got back every single cent of the $54,600. Michael? Oh, Michael. He approached me after the hearing, his face pale after seeing that $80,000 statement. All he said was, "Mom, I'm sorry." I just looked at my son and said, "You owe me an apology, but you owe yourself and your children a whole lot more." I heard he filed for divorce from Tiffany shortly after the fourth baby was born. I don't know where they are now, and I realize I no longer feel responsible for knowing. The first thing I did was sell the old house. Too many painful memories. I'm in a bright 55-plus condo in a coastal town now. It's smaller, but it's all mine. I've joined a Tai Chi class at the community center and rejoined my book club with Brenda. Next month, we are finally taking that trip to the Grand Canyon, the one I put off for 6 years. I still see my grandchildren, but it's at the park for 2 hours and completely on my schedule. They are no longer my burden, they are my joy again. Michael is learning, on his own, how to be a father. I learned a hard lesson at 67. Love does not equal self-sacrifice. Loving someone does not mean setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. My value isn't measured by how much I can serve others, but by how much I respect myself. I'm 67, and I feel like I'm just beginning my life. It's wonderful to finally have time for those forgotten hobbies. What about you? Is there a hobby you've always wanted to pursue but never had the chance? Comment hobby if you know that feeling of wanting to find yourself again.